In response to lobbying by the state's public sector unions, the state budget included pension sweeteners for government workers hired in the last decade and a half who are part of pension tiers 5 and 6, which were created to save money for state and local governments as well as school districts. The budget included lowering the retirement age from 63 to 58 for teachers with 30 years of service, as well as limiting the retirement contributions required by public employees, with the package of changes coming with an estimated price tag of about $500 million, and coming in the wake of sweeteners approved a few years ago that were equally as expensive. For more on the changes to the public sector retirement benefits, we're joined in the Capitol Press Room by Josh Terry, Director of Legislative and Political Action for CSEA, which represents the second largest group of public sector workers in the state and also has private sector members. Thanks for visiting us in studio, Josh.
I appreciate it. Long time, first time.
We appreciate you listening. So as I mentioned at the top, these pension sweeteners do come with a price tag that will need to be shouldered by state and local taxpayers. So what do you see ultimately as the benefit to New York State for these changes when considering the costs?
No, I think that's a valuable question. It's something we should be asking. New Yorkers demand services. They demand things like their roads to be plowed. They want to show up at a hospital and have the services being provided. They want to be able to walk into the DMV and not have to wait all day. In order to do that, you have to invest in the workforce. That is, you can't argue that. And so I think I take a little offense to the term sweetener. I think that's a way to disparage what we're doing.
It makes them more attractive, though.
100%. I think the way people use that, though, is not necessarily always in the right context. But regardless.
That might be something internally for you to examine, Josh.
But we look at what was offered under pension tier 4 and then how it changed to tiers under 5 and 6. And we know that people are not taking the jobs as much as they used to. People used to see that tier 4 pension, and they always knew we were going to get paid less. But that pension at the end was very valuable, and that was the incentive for people to make a career. They're not making it a career anymore. They're coming in later. They're not coming in as early. So by starting to make these changes, we're making these changes to tiers 5 and 6 in order to try to get us back to what that pension used to be, which was the recruitment and the retention tool, so that New Yorkers, when you wake up, your roads are plowed when you're coming down the Northway, when you're at the DMV, or you have somebody that needs that has a developmental disability and they need care. We need those workers there, and that's what that's the end goal, is to make sure we have the staff and the resources for New Yorkers to get those services that they need.
Those employment gaps, though, that you're highlighting are not unique to the public sector. The private sector is having the exact same hiring issues that you just laid out through a variety of public sector positions. And those jobs don't offer, in most cases, when we're talking about low wage or middle income employment opportunities, pension benefits even close to what we're talking about here. So why have you identified the pension as the recruitment and retention issue as opposed to, say, upfront salaries? Why not focus on those? Because I know when I talk to 23-year-olds, 24-year-olds about their life decisions and what they're trying to look for in a job, it's who's going to help me pay off my college loans? Who's going to help me make that first down payment for a home, or maybe just the security deposit for that first apartment? And the pension is not going to help me with that, so I'm going to have to find the job with the best starting salary. So why wasn't that the focus here?
I mean, I don't think it's an either or. I mean, I think
yes-and situation?
It's both.
Okay.
And you can see that with the collective bargaining agreement that we just finalized with the state, which invests in wages, it maintains health benefits. But as people look long-term, and I agree with you, people when they come in at age 23, 24 may not be looking at age 65 when they might think they'll retire. But the workforce is changing a bit. The average age of a new state employee is 35 years old. People are coming in later in life because they're looking down the road and they're saying, I don't have those benefits right now. I don't have a pension lined up. You know, they might have worked for 10 years doing something else. They don't have health benefits. So they're looking towards the state to be like, oh, is there something more? Now, we would love it if people came in earlier because continuity of service is important. People learn these jobs. They stay their whole career. That's really valuable. So that's, what we're trying to appeal to doing. But it's all of the above. It's focusing in our contracts on flex time, on vacation time, family leave. All of that stuff comes into play here. The pension is just one piece of it. It's an important part long term.
And the cost element of it, ultimately, why do you feel like it's worth spending the money on the pension as opposed to this is a zero-sum budgeting experience on salaries? Why not focus the dollars on that? Why spend all of the money on pension as well?
Long term, or if you look at it over the long term, investing in pensions for a workforce is cheaper than doing it upfront cash for salary. The pension is socialized over the course of a person's career. So you could be looking at 30 years of paying for this benefit. Whereas if you're suddenly trying to do a 4%, 5% pay raise for every single public employee in the state, now not just state workers that we negotiated a contract for, but every local government, counties, the school districts, you're going to see a much higher cost.
But aren't we going to be adding more people to the retirement rolls faster by making it so that you can retire faster? And then you're not going to be just paying for the number of retirees. You're going to be paying for additional retirees plus the people you needed to replace them.
Well, let's remember, I mean, the pension fund is set up to make money, and it's been doing a tremendous job.
But money it doesn't make in the markets, though, comes from taxpayers.
And from employees.
Sure.
Employees are still contributing to this.
But a little bit less in the future.
A little bit less. But when you look at what was the overtime figure from last year for the state of New York?
It was a lot.
$1.2 billion. We're paying this one way or the other. Whether it's in overtime, which overtime then causes what? It causes people to get burned out. When we have OPWDD employees that are mandated to work 16 hours a day, every day of the week because they don't have sufficient staff, then they quit. And then we have to figure out a way to backfill that position. Recruitment takes time. It takes money. And in the interim, we're paying overtime. And so one way or the other, we are paying for all this. We're looking for a balance. We will never probably get to the point where we always have sufficient staff for the services we need. Overtime will always be an issue.
Sure.
But this is trying to get enough people in to lower that overtime number in order to make sure people have lives when they work in the public sector. Like, they are not only at work all the time. And that's what a lot of our members do right now.
You mentioned OPWDD, the Office for People with Developmental Disabilities, and there are direct care workers in the sector who are public sector, but a lot of the human services workers who do direct care services are not. They're working for nonprofits, and this is a little off the beaten path for what we brought you in for, but there's been this discussion about trying to access a public pension for those employees. Is that something you think that makes sense, or should they be brought into the fold as public sector workers if they're going to get a public sector union? Because they have said, hey, this would be an important recruitment tool if we had this type of pension. Even a 5 or 6 traditional tier would have been nice for them.
Yeah, so CSEA does represent employees in the private sector that do this work. We are part of that. We were part of the budget fight this year to get a larger COLA and make sure that money goes directly to the workers. This work has been shifted from the state to the private sector over the last 30, 40 years probably.
Yeah, really since Willowbrook.
Correct. Long, well before my time, but it's been...
Yes, Josh is very young.
Since I've been here, this work, they keep pushing more work out, where right now the state's only doing about 15% of the OPWDD work. Now, the work that they do is, there's probably some of the hardest and most expensive clients.
Sure. Dual
diagnosis, a significant number of issues. And so I think this idea of we have to get more resources into the not-for-profits. At the same time, there may come a point where it is just cheaper and easier to bring it back into the public sector if you start applying all those benefits out there. It's not something that we've fully examined because the amount of work is just so massive. 85% of that work is in the private sector.
Sure.
We couldn't just shift it all back. But if you start talking about, enrolling them in a public sector pension, it would beg the question, do we just bring them back on as state employees then and have the state perform that work?
Well, I want to return to the idea of the public sector workers contributing toward their requirement. As part of this effort, there is a reduction in the rates based on income levels that people need to contribute. And I wonder whether this kind of goes against the progressive payment and tax structure that we typically think of in New York, since you are lowering rates for some of those higher income public sector workers and not just providing this benefit to people who are on the lower or middle income scale of the ladder.
Well, if you look at the numbers, the people making above 125 got the smallest as a percentage break. They went down by 0.25%. People making between 100 and 125 with a 0.75% break. Everybody underneath them are getting a larger percentage decrease. These are hard rates. When you enter that new bracket,
okay,
that all of your income is subject to to that rate.
Gotcha.
It's not like an income tax. That was an idea that we had floated a couple years ago to see if we could get traction on. But what we focused on was lowering contribution rates, and our goal was 3% for all employees. That was the ultimate goal. We're happy to say 90% of CSEA members that are in Tier 6 fall now into the 3% bracket, which is massive. We represent lower paid workers throughout the state going into middle income. 90% of our members will be in that. I mean, we have some members that are getting a 1.5% lowering of their contribution. That's an automatic pay increase in their paycheck every week. But I think we did keep it progressive by getting the most relief to the people at the bottom, the lower income, and then working the way up after that.
Lastly, what's next? What do you imagine asking for in the 2027 or maybe 2028, or if you're being strategic, the next time the governor's up for election, when that budget comes around, what do you envision asking for in terms of pension changes?
I've already turned down a couple calls today talking about next year because we're only a few days out from the end of session. But, realistically, Tier 5 and 6 reform will continue to be a focus of CSEA until we can achieve pension parity.
By that time, will all the Tier 4 people have been retired, and thus you don't need parity?
By the time that happens, I might be retired.
Okay.
I don't know. But, but realistically, our members are focused on a few different things. Age and service. So what the teachers' retirement system got is definitely something that we're looking at. Penalties for retiring before age 63, they're draconian. I mean, if you leave at age 55, you're losing almost 60% of your pension in perpetuity. And we have some very difficult jobs where people's bodies physically cannot keep working. So that is something that we're looking at. And then we're going to continue looking at contributions because we made an extremely big step. We took a huge step this year with what we did. But again, our ultimate goal is 3% across the board for everybody. So we're going to keep looking, see what our options are, and see what our members are interested in, what they want us to pursue.
Because this is a very broad net that we're casting with these changes, are we still going to have regional discrepancies between hiring because there are certain places where people want to work and other places where people don't want to work? There are certain school districts that might have more resources than other school districts. I mean, is that going to continue to be an issue when it comes to hiring?
I mean, I think it's always going to be a challenge to hire, let's say, a state employee in the city of New York or even on Long Island or Westchester County. Higher cost of living. We have things like geographic pay differentials inside of our contracts.
Sure.
But, the reality is it's always been a challenge in places like New York City to hire on the public sector side. And it probably will be, which is why if we can make changes on things like pensions to give those incentives to bring people in, we think that'll benefit us over the long term.
And how do you judge the success of the language that was included in this year's budget? If we don't have a massive influx of people joining the state workforce, for example, does that mean this wasn't successful? If we do find that people are all retiring at age 58 when they can, does that mean this was successful? How do you go about assessing something like this? And are there certain metrics that you use, or is it more anecdotal in terms of trying to gauge whether this was worth it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's both. I think it's looking at the hard data that comes in. Are the FTEs up? Are we hiring? Is overtime going down year to year? And I'll tell you, as we've done some of these changes, and I do not attribute this solely to Tier 6 changes, I attribute it to several things. Overtime in OPWDD has come down over the last 2 years. That's a positive. Now, obviously, somewhere like docs, it's gone up for a lot of different reasons. But, I think we have to look at all that data. And then there's the anecdotal evidence of talking to our members. What's going on at your workplace? Are people happy? Are more people applying? It's always good to hear there's more applications coming in than there are jobs available, because that hasn't been the case for a long time, where there might be 5 jobs open and they're not even filling those 5 with what they get in. So I think it's just looking at all of that and, adjusting as we go forward.
Well, we've been speaking with Josh Terry. He is the Director of Legislative and Political Action for CSEA. Josh, thanks for visiting us in the studio.
I appreciate it anytime.
Support for the Capitol Press Room comes from O'Donnell & Associates, a public affairs firm providing strategic guidance to businesses and nonprofits on navigating policy and regulatory issues. More information is available at o'donnellsolutions.com.